everyone, and welcome to Preparing Data for Analysis. So preparing data for analysis, first and foremost, we have to ensure the quality of the data. In this case, what we're looking at are the data types and the attributes to make sure that that attribute is appropriate for the data. Then we want to validate the data for completeness and, more importantly, integrity. Right, where the data can completely be extracted from the original source, right? We want to make sure every single row that we extracted is actually in our data sample, that when we are manipulating the data and working with the data in that extraction process, we still have completeness and that the data is as it was intended. Then comes the hard part where we need to cleanse the data. So we might have to trim and clean and prepare the data for analysis. So we also have to, in this process, understand and address any missing data points. And now we get to do our preliminary exploratory analysis. So when we are preparing data for analysis, we need to make sure that we do the first step, which is to ensure the data quality. Are the data types appropriate? Are all the data within that data type consistent? Is numerical attributes truly a numerical field within our database? Make sure that all of the text data is consistent. So for example, we have the same abbreviation for Pennsylvania throughout. Then our next step is to validate the data, where we're looking at here completeness and the integrity of the data. Right? We want to compare the number of data that were extracted to our data source, make sure that we run some preliminary descriptive statistics, make sure that the date and time fields are in the correct format, especially if we're working with international data and different date formats, and we want to make sure that our string limits for the text fields are appropriate. Then comes the cleansing of the data. So here we want to remove any headings, subtotals, if we have any leading zeros in our data, if we have any non-printable characters, any negative numbers, we don't want parentheses, we want a minus sign. We want to correct any inconsistencies, and we want to determine the best course of action for missing values. So we can keep them in our sample, we can delete the missing values, or we can replace them. Those are the three options that we have, and depending on each data source or data sample, we want to make sure that we're choosing the correct one. Then we want to perform our preliminary exploratory analysis. So in this case, we're looking at the relevance of the questions that we want to answer, right? We want to know how are we going to use this data to answer those initial business questions that we have. So we have different types of functions that we can use to trim and clean the data. So first, we can use a trim function, and this will remove any white space or any type of space before and after the cells, and then we can use a clean function to remove any non-printable characters, and these are the formulas that you see on the screen, so that we can trim white space on either side, we can clean any non-printable characters and do both of them at the same time, which is very typical. So as I mentioned earlier, when you're looking at missing values, you really need to consider your courses of action. So first, we can leave it as is, just keep the total data source and leave the missing values the way they are and use them and see how our data looks. Or we can remove those records that contain the missing values, or we can actually impute values to replace those missing values, like we might replace everything with a 0. So depending on the business question that you're trying to answer and how many missing values, you would want to look at these formulas and to see which course of action is best for your data. Thanks for watching.